Hi, this is Sean from MP3 Car. We're here at CES 2011 over at the Ford booth, and I'm talking with Chris, the product design manager over at Ford for user interfaces. And one of the things that we want to get your perspective on is being in HMI, we have a lot of software developers on the MP3 Car forums, and they're always interested in safety and HMI in general. So I really want to get your perspective, starting off with when you design a desktop application, because a lot of these applications kind of start out in the desktop space. When you move over to not just a mobile phone, but the actual, like a bigger 7-inch screen, but a screen that goes in the car, what kind of things are you looking for in terms of HMI?
Right, so there's a lot of things that stay the same, but there are some things that are different. Right, one of the key things that we want to make sure always stay the same is simplicity, usability, understanding your user, and making sure that you design for them, right?
Okay.
So when I was in grad school, one of the very first things that my advisor did to me is she made everyone in the room stand up, raise their right hand, and repeat after her and say, "I am not the user." And it's a really important thing because when we design for ourselves, we may not be designing for what the majority of the people who will use our products are going to do. So that's key, regardless of whether you're designing for the laptop or the desktop or the car. However, when you get into the car, there's a couple other things that you need to take into consideration. Things like when you're using a desktop, you can focus completely and 100% on the task at hand and use the actual application with all your full attention. When you're in a car, your attention has to be focused on driving. Right. And that uses as much attention as it can. Anything left over you may be able to dedicate to using something else, but your application or interface takes a back seat to driving. That's the most important thing. So when we design for the car, we want to make sure that whatever we design is not going to compete for those attentional resources because those have to be dedicated to driving.
So we're talking like colors or just the way things are styled?
Just the way things are designed from the ground up. So we start really basic. What do we want the app to do? Right? Sometimes it's not going to be appropriate to do everything you can do on a desktop computer in the car, depending on how complex and involved it is.
So like context menus, kind of advanced settings?
Exactly. We don't want 18 different menus with 5 different layers in the car. That may be appropriate, you may be able to visualize it better on the desktop. In a car, your real estate tends to be a bit more limited, and so does your attention. So we got to be careful what we do. At Ford, we actually go through various design processes. We use accepted design theory and a lot of user testing. Now, given that most app developers may not have that available to them, there's still things that they can do. Probably the easiest thing to do, if they're into reading, is to check out a couple books from a fellow named Don Norman, who talks about the design of everyday things, kind of goes through some basic design principles, and Jacob Nielsen, who has a list of 10 what we call usability heuristics. They're very easy things to to design with, whether you're designing for a desktop or a car.
Okay.
The other important thing is there's an author called Karen Holtzblatt who has a book called Contextual Design, which is basically how to design for your users in the environment they're going to be using something. We do that at Ford, and then we start going from there. Once we migrate to the car, we look at, okay, what's available to us in terms of interface? What screen, what buttons, what device? And app developers have to say the same thing. We want to make sure we don't exceed the capabilities of what our device is going to do. If we have a simplistic device, we want to make sure we're using simplistic commands, a simplistic screen, because otherwise it tends to get more complicated.
Because you may not always have a touch screen, and
exactly.
you may have 50 buttons around the side,
exactly.
Right? So
If you try to do more than a device can do, you're going to end up with a very complicated system, which isn't appropriate for the car.
Yeah.
Obviously, things like voice are ideal. You want to be able to speak as much as you can, because in a car, you want to be able to say what you want to do. You don't want to take your hands off the wheel. You don't want to take your eyes off the road. Now, some of the things, like for example at Ford, we have Sync, which has a button right on the steering wheel where we can start talking. A good piece of news for app developers is that we've actually released an application for Sync called AppLink, which lets app developers include Ford APIs so that if their app is going to be used on a Ford car, they can actually have voice commands published to the car. The user
but now AppLink is for the mobile phone, right? So you're
correct.
building an app for your phone
correct.
and
yes.
then using AppLink
correct.
to then interact with the vehicle.
That's one example, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're actually going to develop for something that fits into a car, like a piece of hardware,
yeah.
we want to make sure that there's simple laid out interfaces, large buttons, large things to press. So there's a thing in usability called Fitts Law, and what that is it's a speed accuracy trade-off. The more accurate I have to be in touching something, the longer it's going to take me to do that.
Yeah.
If I have a very small button on a screen and I'm driving a car and it's bumping around and moving,
you're going to miss it.
It's going to take me a lot more time to hit that button.
Yeah.
If the button's big, I can hit it really quickly. It's less time with my hands off the wheel. It's a quicker action, quicker task.
Yeah.
It's something that I can do.
So we've seen a lot of apps that have been made for the vehicle. We saw 3 that Ford has made here. So one of the things that I want to talk about is, what have you seen that developers are doing wrong?
Right, so there's a couple of different things. And I'm hesitant to say that anyone's doing anything wrong. Moving these things to the car is something that's still very new, and we're still trying to define what that means and what the best way is to do it. There's lots of stuff out there on how to design applications for desktop computers and in the traditional computing world, but the car's kind of a new space. I mean, Ford's only been at CES for a few years, and a bunch of other auto manufacturers the same way, so it's still being defined. What I'm seeing so far that I think we can improve upon is that things for mobile apps, you don't want to have a lot of physical interaction. While you're driving, it's best to keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. Like
and these are apps that we're talking about that are specifically that you've got in your phone.
Or even on the car. If you design something that actually goes in the vehicle's dashboard, same thing. You don't want to be touching it that much. If you can design it to work in a way where you can maybe have some preset routines. I push a button, it does several different things at once, so I don't have to keep interacting with it.
Okay.
Or if I can talk to it, or if I can do something in a way that I don't have to keep playing with it, that's the best way to do it, because hands on the wheel is what's most important there, as is eyes on the road. Secondly, we don't want it to be too complicated. If I have to think in depth about what I want this app to do or what I want it to do next. So it should be just really intuitive. Exactly. So we've seen, so being at CES here, we've seen a lot of new technology. Right. We've seen a million and a half tablets here, and a lot of these tablets have maybe two-point touch, multi-touch, using gesture-based. Right. Do you see gesture-based or as kind of a nice safety mechanism that people are using, or are there other new technologies that you've seen that may make HMI, the next, be able to go to the next level with these interfaces? Right. Well, multi-touch can go both ways. Multi-touch is a great way that you can not just touch something, but give a gesture to indicate what you mean with that touch. What we want to make sure we do is if we do a gesture touch, we want to make sure it's controllable by one hand and it's a very quick gesture. We don't want to have multi-point touch with two different hands, because we don't want you steering with your knees while you touch the application with your hands. But you can scroll that way. Right. Instead, like this can mean something different than this. So what traditionally we'd have to do by hitting a button to scroll down, 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 down. If we could do a quick scroll like that, that might be better. Or a flick like we've seen so much. Exactly, that sort of thing. But again, the real key is with interfaces, is there a way that we can avoid touching it altogether? That's the real design problem. So short of actually putting like a mesh on your head and having thought control go to your apps, we're still a ways off from that. So this is just an interesting interesting thing. We've seen Kinect be hacked a lot, and we went to a company earlier that had these hand motion controls in front. So you're not actually touching anymore. And the way their demo worked is you kind of went like that, and then you had a pointer on the screen. Obviously, you needed to know where you were, but what if you could do gestures in the air? Now, we've actually asked this to a couple different people. We've got some mixed opinions on it. What's your opinion on air-based gestures, where you don't have to touch anything, you're not speaking to it, but you're kind of interacting with it in the air? So it's hard to say. Obviously, I haven't seen it in the car yet. I can think of pros, I can think of cons, right? It could be something very simple to do without having to reach over to where a touchscreen might be. It keeps you still within the sphere of the steering wheel, which is where you want to keep your hands anyway. At the same time, there's a chance you could bump something. You might actually hit the steering wheel when you do that. Or hit your passenger. Exactly. Well, yeah, you don't want that either. An angry passenger is no fun for anybody. Yeah. But there's multiple ways that you can do things. Obviously, I'm by no means an expert in what could be, but when you see things, it's very easy to say, this is a good idea or that's not a good idea. But obviously, there's potential. We'd have to see how it goes. I guess what's left to ask is where can people look for information on where to build good interface designs? Absolutely. So there's lots of academic literature out there. If you have access to places like the Society of Automotive Engineers, they actually have a very good recommended practice. It's the SAE J2364 recommended practice on how to design. We'll write that down. Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. To how to design things for the car, what you should allow and what you shouldn't allow. Because I guess I should mention, one of the other things that's unique about the car is that, at least at Ford, we allow you to do different things when you're stopped or in park versus when you're driving. Or over 10 miles an hour, I think is what... yeah, it differs by manufacturer, right. So what do you decide to lock out versus what do you decide to keep allow when you're in the car? The SAE spec kind of gives some guidance towards that to say, if your task involves this, you should lock it out, but if it doesn't involve this, or if it involves less than this, you can let it go, and it might be okay. In addition, there's some different documentation from the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers kind of saying, as OEMs, here's what we've decided to do when it comes to developing our interfaces, and here's what we plan to do going forward to be safe and conservative. And that's not a bad thing to look at either. Even though you may not work for an OEM, you can see what we're doing to kind of, on the OEM front, to release stuff like that. We'll definitely have to get some hands on that information, but really appreciate the time. It's awesome stuff. My pleasure. Thank you. Great.